Well, we are in day 24 of our 31 days through the book of Hebrews. So today, after today, we will be 1 week away from finishing out the book of Hebrews. It's been a fun study walking through this book with you guys so far. So I'm so excited you guys are still joining with us every single day. Hopefully you feel encouraged. Hopefully you feel equipped with the Word of God. Hopefully this has meant something to you as you've walked through this journey with everyone together. I've enjoyed this study personally as I've been learning a lot more just about God, about myself, and about Jesus throughout this story. I told you in the beginning that this is probably one of my favorite books in all of the Bible. So I kind of felt like I already had a lot of knowledge about this book, but I'm learning so much more as I study through this book with you guys. Today we continue on the Hall of Faith chapter as we spend time talking through verses 23 through 31. And the previous couple of days we've seen that the writer, to back up actually to chapter 10, he said that the righteous ones will live by faith. That faith is something that's lived out. Not just something that we have, it's something that we live out. And the righteous ones will live by faith. So when we live by faith, we are declared righteous. And it says there in quoting Habakkuk that we will not shrink back. Those who live by faith will not shrink back. They'll be declared righteous and they will please God. And the writer of Hebrews strongly encourages people to endure to the end, to have confidence, not to throw it away, not to shrink back, but to live a life of faith that declares them righteous, that pleases God, and therefore inherits the eternal reward that's been promised to them. And to show examples of this, the writer's showing faithful examples of men and women from the Old Testament. So far, he showed us the stories of Cain and the better sacrifice that he offered. He showed us the story of Enoch and how he walked with God, how he didn't have to experience death because of the faith that he had in God. And we saw the story of Noah, who, when God told him that a great flood would come and destroy the earth, because of his faith, he built an ark, and his family was delivered. And he had faith that God and what he promised. Then also moved on to yesterday, we see the story of Abraham and his descendants. Well, Abraham and Sarah, they left the home country to the land that God had promised them, the land that God was going to show them. They didn't know where they were going, but they packed up and left. Then they even though they were old in age, God promised them a son and descendants as numerous as the stars, and they had faith in that. And because of their faith, they were declared righteous. And we see the stories of Isaac, their son, Jacob, their grandson, and the people of God, and the Israelites, the 12 tribes of Israel forming. And the promises of God are coming to fruition as the people of God are expanding. So we covered pretty much in those 2 days, the last 2 days, we covered all the people of Genesis. Pretty much the entire story of Genesis is wrapped up in those first 17 verses here in this, or excuse me, the verse 22 verses of this chapter. But today we enter into the story of Moses and the story of Israelites leaving Egypt, walking towards the promised land. So join me in verse 23 as we go to verse 31. By faith, when he was born, By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. There's different stories that are used here are showing that people chose faith over fear. They chose faith over fear. And the writer's using these examples to show that the people that he's writing to are experiencing a lot of fear as they face persecution, as they face rejection. And he's showing that these people, they face fear, but yet they still endure because they had faith. They chose faith over fear. You know, at the very beginning, by faith, Moses, when he was born, his parents chose to keep him. They chose to keep him alive and to protect him, because the Pharaoh had declared an edict that all the male children of the Hebrew mothers would be killed. And they protected, and they put Moses into hiding, and ultimately you know the story that they put him in a basket and let him loose on the river. And he washed over to the daughter of Pharaoh, who raised him and kept him. They had faith that God would deliver their son. Why? Because it says that he was beautiful. The word actually means translated that they saw that he was special. They believed that in the promises of God, they believed that God had something in store for their son. So they let him go. They let him loose. And he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter. Moses grew up experiencing all the pleasures of Egypt, had all the treasures of Egypt at his disposal. He could live a luxurious life, but he was still a Hebrew. And one day he saw, as he was walking amongst the people of God, he saw a man of God, a man of Israel, a Hebrew man being mistreated and being abused by an Egyptian slave master. And in that moment, Moses, through faith, chose to identify himself with the Hebrew people, not the people of Egypt. If he identified himself with the people of Egypt, he would not have stepped in. He would not have interfered. He would allow the man to be mistreated. He would allow the man to be ultimately killed, probably. But instead, he stepped in. We know the story. He murdered the Egyptian slave master, and because of that, he fled out of Egypt, not out of fear of Pharaoh, but out of faith in God. He had faith that God would deliver him. He had faith that God would deliver his people. It says there he chose to identify himself. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt. He was identifying himself not only with the people of God, but ultimately with God himself, and ultimately, therefore, Jesus. And that by identifying himself with Jesus, he was going to take on the reproach himself. That because of that moment, as he identified himself with the people of God, he was going to experience the same shame, the same beatings, the same torture as they were, as he fled Egypt. So by faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of king, for he endured, how? As seeing him who is invisible. In that moment, in those 40 years before he ever returned to Egypt, he experienced God in ways that we can only imagine. He had to experience God face to face. He got to see what was invisible, visible. He had to experience God. His faith was sight. He got to see and experience and taste the goodness of God as he prepared him for what was coming. And ultimately, we know the story that Moses returned to Egypt, went to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." And God used Moses to be the means of salvation to these people. He walked into that great country of Egypt and declared that his people were to be set free. And ultimately, Pharaoh whose heart was hardened, did not allow this to happen. But after plague after plague after plague, finally, the breaking point was when the angel of death came and was going to kill the firstborn. But it says that the people of God have faith that God would deliver them. So he took the blood of goats and the blood of bulls and put it over their doorposts of their homes, and the angel passed over. That's where we celebrate the story of Passover, the day that the angel passed over them. Because of that, Pharaoh finally had it and says, "All right, take him away." So Moses led the people of God out of Egypt. You imagine just the celebration they have as they're leaving slavery, they're leaving hardship, they're leaving all this, and they're walking, and they come to the Red Sea, and that's when the complaining starts. They think, man, God and Moses have led us to our deaths. There's no way around this body of water. The Egyptians are chasing after us now because Pharaoh changed his mind. They're coming after them in their horses and their chariots. By faith, they walked across the Red Sea as God used Moses to split the sea, and they walked through it. As the people of God, as the Israelites walked through the waters, the Egyptians came following in hot pursuit, and the waters came down, crashing over them, and ultimately they all drowned. But the people of God survived as they kept marching towards the promised land. Then it uses the example of Jericho. We know that years later, after years of wandering around the desert, after years of provisions of God, God provided so many different ways throughout the desert. We've actually talked a lot about that in the book of Hebrews, providing water from the rock, providing manna from heaven. But here, it jumps forward to the story of Jericho. This mighty fortress, mighty fortified city that's before them. It's on their way to the promised land. They had to go through Jericho to receive the land that was promised to them. But this city stood in the way. And one of the most bizarre military strategies in history, they marched around the city every single day for a week, screaming at the walls, blowing trumpets. And ultimately, on the last day, as they screamed, as the trumpets blew, the walls of Jericho fell down. And they were able to march into the city, march into the territory that God had promised them. But not only did the cities fall, there was a woman in that city named Rahab, who was declared here a prostitute. She was not a woman of good reputation, but something was special about her, ultimately because she had faith and trust in God. Not the God of her people, but the God of Israel. She had faith in the one true God. And she allowed spies of Israel to come in to scout out the city of Jericho to see what they would need to do. And her family was spared. As the walls came down, she lived and survived. And because of her faith, We'll see her once again all the way in Matthew. In the lineage of Jesus, one of 4 women's names are mentioned in in the lineage of Christ, and Rahab's one of them. So God chose to use this woman who lived by faith and was declared righteous, who pleased God, to be a great example of faith, but also part of the lineage and the story of Jesus. All these stories are about people choosing faith over fear. And the writer uses these examples to show that these people too, these readers, can have faith over fear, ultimately because there's another person, there's another man who chose to identify himself with us. The story of Moses ultimately points to Jesus, that the Son of God came to identify himself, to dwell amongst his people. He chose to identify with you and me, to experience life the way that we do, to experience suffering, to experience death, to experience all the things that we experience, but to live a life that was sinless, perfect. But he took on a lot of reproach. He took on a lot of shame, took on a lot of guilt as he went to that cross. We'll see in the next chapter, he scorned the cross, despising the shame. He's now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. That all of that, he came to draw near to the people that he loved, so that we could have a way of drawing near to him. So as he stepped out of that tomb on that 3rd day, the sea was split, and we were able to walk out of our slavery. We were able to walk out of our death. A way was made, a way to the Father, a way to draw near to our God was made through the blood that was sacrificed on that cross by Jesus. He came to identify with his people so that we could identify with him. So today, we offer you the opportunity. Do you identify with Christ? Do you choose him over all the pleasures of sin, all the pleasures of this world? Those are all temporary. Those are all fleeting. But the pleasures of God are eternal. And the reward is better. The reward is greater. And it's kept in heaven with Jesus right now, as 1 Peter says. Choose to identify with Jesus, who did everything to identify with you.